Hi there and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. Glad you could join us. We have a full table this week as we take on improving K-12 education in Michigan. It is critical to our success as a state, but Michigan has been tumbling in the rankings compared to other states. According to the Education Trust Midwest, Michigan ranks 41st in the country in fourth grade reading levels, down from 28th in 2003, and similar stats in math. There is an urgent need to take a comprehensive look at education policy, funding, teacher evaluations, and testing. So the governor put together a commission early last year to study K-12 improvements. To save you from reading the 146-page report, here are some of the highlights for you. The commission recommended more funding for at-risk students in high-poverty schools and figuring out how to effectively fund schools. They're also looking for better teacher prep programs that up certification requirements. Also, universal access to community college as well as pre-K. Changing governance, letting the governor perhaps appoint the state superintendent and members of the Board of Education, or abolishing the board altogether. And when it came to school choice, the commission talked about the importance of high-quality options, but stopped short of any real recommendations on charter school expansion policies. There is really a lot to consider here, and we have a full table to help us do just that. Joining us, as always, are My Week contributors Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Hey, guys, it's always good to see you.
Good to be back.
And back with us, Amber Ariano. She's the Executive Director of the Education Trust Midwest. Amber, it's good to see you. And Chastity Pratt-Dawsey, reporter at Bridge Magazine. Good to see you as well, Chastity.
Hello.
All right, so we have a lot to go through here. And starting off with this commission report, because we feel like we've been waiting for this. So these recommendations, and coming from this commission, which was made up of business leaders, educators, you had the state superintendent on there as well. Chastity, I'm going to start with you. Of all the things that I listed off, kind of the highlights there, what do you think was the most crucial that came out of this report?
You know, in order to fix a problem, you have to admit you have a problem. So admitting that Michigan's high-income students are among the lowest achieving students in the state, that's a big step. You know, we know that there's an achievement gap, has always been an achievement gap between higher income kids and lower income kids. But to say, look, Ann Arbor, Rochester, Bloomfield, Birmingham, Grosse Pointe, your students are among the lowest achieving students in the nation. That's a really big move towards understanding what's going on here in Michigan. And when that is understood, we might see some real action.
Because a lot of times the conversation about education centers around or is focused on Detroit, and it has been, of course, in the last year since they had that infusion of money and kind of staving off bankruptcy. But this really is a statewide issue. Nolan, I'm going to go to you. What stood out for you was the most important thing to come out of this report?
Well, I want to go back to what Chastity said first, because she said when that's understood. And I think that's one of the big problems we have in Michigan. Amber's group's been telling us for years, we're underperforming the nation. Every study says in every demographic group in this state, we underperform the nation. But where is the sense of urgency among parents and communities to say, fix this? And, you know, I've worked with Amber's group and other groups on these efforts to make Michigan a top 10 state. And I believe until parents and the communities get tired of this or understand the implications of us doing so poorly, nothing will be fixed. But you don't get any sort of sense among the parents and the school districts themselves, the communities, that, hey, we got to move. That wasn't the case in Tennessee when they moved. That wasn't the case in Florida. People said, enough of this.
You don't think parents have been effective saying that enough is enough, Amber?
Well, I think there's been a great deal of denial. You know, when you look at over the last decade to see what happened in education and as school achievement started to decline, I mean, one of the responses by the Michigan Department of Education was to actually change the grades, right, so that people didn't know how bad things were going. And so there just was not a real honesty about the problem. And I think that Chastity's right. I think this report is really owning the problem, right, saying we really do have a crisis. It's a validation of what many organizations have been saying for years. And so at least in that way, we're not in denial anymore, right? There is now a broad consensus that we really are in a crisis. We need dramatic action and a coherent, comprehensive plan to move forward. And now the question is, how do we make that happen?
Okay, so did they come up with the correct things that would help move us forward when you start talking about infusing more money into districts? Because that's always been a sticking point when you talk about changing certification for teachers.
Well, I mean, I think the money question is huge in Michigan, and there are a lot of people who want to deny that that's part of the problem. But we also have, I think you can marry this study pretty handily with the sufficiency study, the adequacy study that we did that showed we're not sending enough money to almost any district to do the kind of job that we think they ought to do. You know, I don't know that the solutions in this report are all the things that we need to do. I mean, there were some things in there that I sort of scratched my head about.
Like what?
Well, this idea of changing the way that the state board and the governor relate to each other. I think we all agree that what we have right now doesn't work. The suggestions in the report, I'm not sure, are the way that we want to go. I think we want to look at other states that are doing better and borrow from them. That's one of the things we're really bad at here at Michigan. I mean, there's other states that have, you know, Nolan mentioned Tennessee and Florida. Those used to be backwaters in education. Now they are places that other people look to. Massachusetts and Maryland lead the nation in educational outcomes. Why don't we in this state think that, you know, why don't we do what they do or more of what they do to get better results?
But don't you think, kind of connecting the dots there to governance, though, Chastity, though, that's been one of our large problems here in Michigan, because we've had so many decision-making processes change from one area of government to the other, and the state school reform office, and then you have the Board of Education, that if we finally did change the governance here, that you would have a more cohesive approach.
Well, the thing is, it's just like Stephen was saying, other states have a way of doing things. Why don't we adopt those? There's a word for it, best practices. You know, why don't we adopt best practices? Here in Michigan, when we change how the board works with the governor, when we change what the MDE does, when we put the state reform office in the Department of Technology, when we continue to make changes, that destabilizes the entire system. And we don't stick with the same program or even the same governance structure. It destabilizes the entire system. So we need to look at best practices and stick to something, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in office. Stick to something and, you know, let the spaghetti stick on the wall for a while.
Do you think that that's what we need to do, Nolan? But what plan, I guess, is what we should be sticking with?
You know, I think we need to do a lot of things, and I think this plan lacks a certain amount of boldness in terms of putting together a cohesive strategy. One of the things, the big thing that holds us back is we don't have a cohesiveness here where everybody is pulling in the same direction, because we don't have a whole lot of accountability. Nobody really owns education exclusively. The governor has a piece, the legislature's always in meddling, the state school board, and you know, everybody's pulling against each other. In these other states we mentioned, they had a united front to move this forward. I think we may need an education czar at this point to say, hey, these are the things we're going to do. It's good to send more money, particularly to schools with at-risk students, but you have to have a plan for students for spending it. And we still can't in Michigan get to an effective accountability system where we evaluate teachers and students and schools consistently across the board and stick with it.
Let's talk a little bit about teachers, and as we kind of go down the road to accountability. And Amber, let me ask you, this plan has the idea to change certification for teachers, to kind of up it a bit. What do you think that would be more effective? And have we seen it work in other states when you change that kind of training process and education for teachers themselves?
Yeah, you know, we actually just made it much tougher in recent years to be certified as a teacher in Michigan. And what's been happening in many communities is that they're seeing huge shortages, especially in high poverty communities. So I don't know that raising it again is going to solve the problem. I mean, we've got, as Stephen and Nolan said, there's sort of larger structural problems going on, right, that are helping drive those challenges. You know, we're one of the worst states in the country for how we pay teachers in high poverty communities. We need to close the gap between rich communities and poor communities and what we pay teachers. We do need to hold teachers accountable for their performance. We're not really doing that yet. There's a plan that's been put in place that's been supposed to be implemented now for the last few years. It hasn't happened. And I think that's just one example of a lot of examples where you've got folks on the left that want more spending and want more equity, right? And teachers in high poverty communities should be paid more. They absolutely deserve it, especially when they're high performing. You've got folks on the right that don't want to pay for that, right? And want to keep changing things on the standards. You've got folks on the left that don't want teachers to be held accountable for their performance. So this is really an ideological struggle that we're experiencing in the state. The truth is that all of that needs to be done. You know, there are many on the right and many on the left that you know, charter schools need to be held accountable and authorizers, but so does K-12. I mean, like, you know, we need more accountability, but we do need more spending. And so that's the leadership challenge is getting all of these folks on both sides of the aisle to a sensible,
haven't had
common
it.
sense.
I would
And
add
speaking
merit pay, Amber, to keep the best and brightest in place. And I don't think there should be any limit to what a great teacher makes.
But we can't even get the state to implement a system that
the
actually
biggest-
considers performance. And how do you consider, you know, how do you even
Yeah.
I
implement
feel like the
it?
biggest problem has always been what you point out, which is leadership. I mean, think about what the sort of schizophrenic nature of what this governor has said about education, what he wants to do, and then doesn't follow up on. Think about past governors. We've been all over the map, and no one has said, here's the way forward, and I'm just going to push as far and as fast as I can along that path. We end up sort of zigzagging and not getting.
Let me
end
add.
up with a term-limited legislature.
That's right.
Ruling schools instead of your Michigan Department of Education.
Yeah.
Correct. Let me ask about this. Do you believe the commission really punted when it came to school choice and when it came to policies and governance of charter schools and opening and closing? If you have this group of 25 people who are supposed to be the end-all, be-all in terms of looking at education in our state, and they did not come up with any plans, what did you think of that, Chastity?
You mean the Education Commission that was?
Yeah.
It was definitely a punt. It was a political football that, you know, the Republicans and the Democrats just didn't really want to deal with. And again, for me, it goes back to the issue of who's really in charge and who wants to be in charge and who really should be in charge. Should it be the legislature making these decisions? Should it be the voters? Should it be the Department of Education determining who opens and closes charter schools in one city? You know, when you can't even decide who should be in charge, then of course there's going to be a punt and nobody's going to be in charge.